Hello and welcome back to What Just Happened. My name is Samuel McVicar. Today I am joined by Aédán Mordecai, lead Asia Pacific analyst, and we're going to be looking at how Asia is being impacted by the ongoing US-Israeli bombing campaign in Iran. Just before I jump into that, if you want to be notified as soon as we release new episodes, please subscribe to our podcast mailing list. There's no spam, no junk. Just the new episodes, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Links for all of that are in the show notes or description down below. So with that, Mr. Aédán, thank you for joining me, sir.
Very happy to be here today. Thanks for asking me.
Awesome. So obviously, past couple of weeks, there's a lot of global attention right now, understandably, on the Middle East, the military escalation between the US, Israel, and Iran. But your desk has been reporting that Asia is actually one of the regions most exposed to this fallout. Many countries in Asia depend on imported energy from the Gulf region. So I just wanted to move through the different countries that your desk has been reporting on in dailies and kind of get a better understanding about how this conflict is impacting a mass part of the world. So just to start, Aédán, can you just give us a high-level look at why Asia is particularly vulnerable to the disruptions caused by this conflict, particularly with regards to energy markets?
Sure. Like you said, a huge importer of both oil and gas for its energy needs, the region, and that's been growing. Partly it's a positive trend because it's the consequence of the region being one of the fastest growing economic regions in the world. And with that, you get a greater energy demand. It's also become an increasingly important manufacturing hub, particularly for electronics and embedded in so many related supply chains. And those industries and related sectors are all very energy hungry often. And so there's huge demand from the region for energy, more so than can be supplied internally. And that domestic production of energy, of oil and gas, in a lot of cases for our countries, has actually been falling in the past decade as well, which doesn't help that sort of trend. So as a result, the Strait of Hormuz is, for Asia at least, I think more than around 60% of its crude oil passes through there, and around a third of its liquefied natural gas. So it's LNG. So it just kind of highlights how important it is to the region.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Strait of Hormuz. As we're recording, I just saw some reporting coming from The Guardian about 3 ships being hit just an hour ago in the Strait of Hormuz, one of them being a Thai bulk carrier. So we'll talk a little bit more in a second why that's so consequential for Asian countries like Thailand. But I just wanted to look at what's been going on in the past week or so with some of these measures that countries have taken. So this involves like rationing and austerity, essentially. You noted in your reporting that Bangladesh, for example, closed its universities nationwide to ease its pressure on its power system. Pakistan just yesterday introduced some austerity measures. So can you tell us a little bit more about the different measures these countries are taking? And are we already in the early stages of an energy crisis?
So the impact on the ground differs a lot. The economies represent various different levels of resiliency to certain shocks. Some are much better prepared than others. You mentioned Pakistan and Bangladesh, and as less developed countries and with less resources than themselves, with lower stockpiles and not enough sufficient domestic supply of energy, not a lot of alternative options such as renewable energy, and also with more limited financial capacity to purchase fuel on the spot market at what is elevated prices at the moment. They are with some other countries such as Myanmar or more on the sharp end of the impacts so far, and as a result they're aware of that, and so have been preemptive in trying to reduce. When you can't really materially increase supply in the short term, you're going to have to try and manage demand. So that's what those efforts represent. But Doesn't mean necessarily there's shortages right now and then they have no energy, but they're aware that this situation should drag on, and trying to manage that demand as early as possible is the wise thing to do. Whether those efforts go far enough is another question. Obviously, there's a political element to it, particularly now for those countries. It's Ramadan and it's similar to Eid. It's hard to increase prices a lot or radically cut services they're providing, and trying avoiding power cuts is paramount right now. But as this goes on, the impact will be more so for those countries. But for other countries who are better prepared, and say China, Japan, Korea, in the terms of particularly like Japan and Korea, they're very reliant on imported energy. But on the other hand, they've got significant stockpiles, and they've also at least have the financial capacity to keep purchasing, even if it's at higher prices. So there'll still be an impact, but there's different risks that different countries are looking at right now.
Yeah, thanks, Aiden. And I'm glad you brought up China. I'm going to ask you that about China in just a minute, but I just wanted to touch on India. So your reporting notes that India, world's third largest oil importer, around 40% of its crude passes through the Strait of Hormuz, which, as we noted earlier, is not possible at the moment, or at least extremely risky. So Washington has temporarily eased sanctions so that India can buy Russian oil that is stuck at sea. I'm just wondering, how much does that relief from Washington actually help India in the short term? And does this signal any kind of broader shift in how countries are thinking about energy security versus geopolitics right now?
Yeah, I think it does. It has a material impact for India because the waiver will allow them to buy Russian oil again, but without the worry about it upsetting the trade relations with the US. And that was the biggest issue for India. That they got 50% tariffs placed on them from the US last year, and publicly, at least, Washington was citing its continued purchase of Russian oil, while of course Russia is fighting its war in Ukraine as one of the reasons that it placed those tariffs. And only this year, after a lot of negotiations, both sides announced that they reached a framework for a trade agreement. But also to secure that, India has greatly reduced their buying of Russian oil. And to do that, they had to buy more fuel and energy from the Gulf. So obviously, this development is not very welcome for that change in trend for India. And so it's welcome from a New Delhi's point of view. And because they've been buying quite a lot of Russian oil in the last few years, the refineries and the supply chains are suited to processing that and purchasing that. And so it shouldn't be too much of a difficult transition at all. And I think I read there's maybe even 30 million barrels already being purchased since that waiver was issued. So there is a material impact in smoothing the price increases, etc. But that will still be there, and I don't think any country is going to avoid price increases. But like you said, it also highlights that the US doesn't really want this conflict it doesn't want its partners in the region to feel like this conflict is unduly impacting them, and while they try and achieve their particular goals in the Gulf. That might be hard to do, but this waiver does highlight that they're willing to show certain flexibility to try and reduce the impact at least, but won't be able to completely remove it.
Thanks, Aiden. So let's talk China. As you mentioned before, China's in a much better position than other countries that we've already mentioned, smaller countries, smaller economies like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar. This is largely due to China's massive petroleum reserves. I think your reporting notes that it can cover 100 days of consumption. So from Beijing's perspective, is this crisis more of a short-term logistical problem, or is it something that could actually reshape its long-term energy strategy, in your opinion?
I think at the moment they feel like it's an issue they can manage, given that they've prepared for such a scenario. They've been looking to insulate their economy from all sorts of external shocks, and and this is one of them. At the same time, they were the biggest importer of energy in the world, a huge demand that's growing all the time as the economy grows and as they can keep their manufacturing levels exceptionally high. But they've built reserves, like you said. They've installed a huge amount of renewable energy capacity over the years and continue to do so. They have domestic forms of fuel if they want to use it. They've kept made even more coal plants, so they can switch to more coal energy, even if it may be dirtier energy if needs to be. So they do have done preparations. It doesn't make them immune to it at all. Like I said, still a huge importer of energy, and no country is immune, but they'll feel they can weather it, at least for the short term. Obviously, if this becomes a prolonged issue, just like every country, they will also have to deal with more issues. But in terms of changing a longer term strategy, I don't think so, because they're already acting quite cautiously. I mean, we've seen it. They ban their refineries, or they put restrictions on their refineries from exporting refined petroleum, to show that they're acting in on a side of caution, but also they're going to continue their pursuit of reducing their vulnerability to external shocks, and this will just vindicate those efforts over the years and only accelerate them further. So we can just expect further emphasis on renewable energy, installing diversifying energy sources from Central Asia, from Russia, from the Gulf, from all options, making sure those fuel sources also to be able to be purchased in case of some conflict where they maybe face sanctions. So they'll be looking to continue to look to do that, and that's not going to be a new trend, but this episode will certainly have given them more belief that this is the right strategy to pursue.
So lastly, just want to wrap up with triggers, warnings, and indicators. What are you and your desk watching for that would tell us if the energy situation in Asia is getting significantly worse, or alternatively, that different countries are managing to adapt?
I think a few things we're looking for. One is, like I said, how prolonged this is really. There's already going to be an impact on inflation and energy prices that's baked in. And even if the situation or the conflict is resolved very soon, it'll take some time to get energy supplies and the infrastructure that makes that happen proceeding again. But it's how long does it take? And if we're still facing quite severe issues come summer, I think concerns will grow as energy demand peaks in the region, typically in the hotter weather. And then particularly the smaller economies, as I mentioned before, are going to have to probably make choices about where energy is used. And that could impact industrial output, particularly because typically households would be prioritized in such a situation. But there's also, if we're looking just beyond energy, the Gulf is and the Strait is a source of other products and for key in plastics and manufacturing. So we could have impacts on supply chains later in the year and shortages potentially there in components, and as well as that agricultural production, fertilizer. Asia imports a lot of fertilizer via the Strait, and that's being severely undermined at the moment. And if that continues, if that continues, it's likely to impact yields and agricultural production late in the year, particularly as potentially there's a significant El Nino period approaching, according to weather forecasters and climate forecasters, which particularly for Asia results in hotter but also drier weather, which is already not particularly favorable for agricultural conditions. So if we combine that with maybe potential fertilizer shortages, then we have potentially food security issues, which would compound already likely inflation issues we're going to see. So I think it all really comes down to how long this lasts, I think, and it's out of Asia's control in a lot of ways. and they will just respond as well as they can. But as I mentioned earlier, certain countries and certain states will have more agency to make better choices than others. But they're really more waiting and seeing, and trying to prepare and mitigate the damage as much as possible, and don't have a lot of options in directly shaping the situation.
Thank you, Aiden. Yeah, that's sounds like it could be a recipe for kind of a perfect storm this summer, as you say, with a tough energy market in Asia, compounding different issues. That food security issue that's a worrying one. Thank you very much for joining, Aiden. We will keep in touch as this progresses. I might drag you back on here.
Of course, great to be on.
Thank you very much for watching. Just as I mentioned at the top, if you are interested in being notified every time we release a new episode across both of our podcast channels, please do subscribe to that mailing list in the description or show notes below. With that, we will see you next time.